For 30 years, I was the most feared art appraiser in New York City, until my own nephew framed me for forgery and stole my life. Now I scrub floors for a man who is about to make a $50 million mistake. He thinks I'm just the help. He has no idea I'm the only one who can save him. Hello everyone, I am Mary. In my 60 years on this earth, I have seen families torn apart by secrets. But this story changes everything. The smell of lemon industrial cleaner is something you never quite get out of your pores. It settles into the lines of your hands and clings to your hair like a bad memory. I wrung out the gray mop water into the yellow bucket on wheels and watched the suds dissolve. It was 2 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday. The 42nd floor of the Thorpe auction house was silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning and the squeak of my rubber soles on the marble floor. To the world I was just Betty the night cleaner. I wore a shapeless blue uniform that smelled of starch, and I kept my gray hair tucked under a net. When people looked at me, they saw a woman who had failed at life. They saw a woman whose biggest responsibility was making sure the brass railing was free of fingerprints. They did not see Elizabeth Vance. They did not see the woman who had once held the art world in the palm of her manicured hand. They did not know that 20 years ago, I could look at a brushstroke from 10 feet away and tell you if the artist was left-handed or right-handed, or if he had been drinking wine while he painted. I pushed the mop bucket toward the double mahogany doors of the CEO's office. Usually the office was empty at this hour. I liked it when it was empty. I would dust the heavy oak desk and imagine myself sitting behind it again. I would run my fingers over the spines of the leather books and remember the smell of the library in my old townhouse on the Upper East Side. But tonight the lights were blazing. Through the frosted glass, I could see a shadow pacing back and forth. It was a nervous pace. It was the walk of a man who was trapped in a cage of his own making. I hesitated with my hand on the brass handle. I was supposed to clean the executive suite before the morning staff arrived at 6. If I didn't finish, I would lose this job. And at 62 years old, with a criminal record attached to my name, finding another job would be impossible. I took a deep breath and knocked softly. There was no answer. The pacing continued. I opened the door just a crack to see if I could slip in and empty the trash without being noticed. Julian Thorpe was shouting into his phone. He was a handsome man in that sharp and expensive way that money buys. He had his father's jawline, but he had none of the old man's patience. His tie was loosened, and his sleeves were rolled up to his elbows. He looked exhausted. He looked like a man who had not slept in a week. I stood frozen in the doorway holding my trash bag. He did not see me. People like Julian Thorpe never saw people like me. We were just furniture that moved. He was pacing in front of a covered easel that stood in the center of the room like a shrine. I listened to his voice. It was tight with panic. He was saying that the wire transfer had to go through by morning. He was saying that this sale was the only thing keeping the auction house from bankruptcy. He was begging. It is a terrible thing to hear a powerful man beg. It makes the world feel unstable. I stepped inside quietly. My plan was to grab the wastebasket and leave. I moved like a ghost across the plush carpet. I had learned to be invisible over the last 3 years. I kept my eyes on the floor. But then Julian ended the call and threw his phone onto the leather sofa. He walked over to the easel and ripped the velvet cover off. He needed to look at his salvation. He needed to reassure himself that the $50 million he was about to spend was worth it. I should have looked away. I should have kept my eyes on the trash can. But I could not help it. The instinct was still there, buried under layers of shame and lemon cleaner. I looked up. The painting was magnificent. It was a portrait of a young woman with a veil. The lighting was soft and ethereal. The background was a misty landscape of jagged rocks and blue water. It was clearly meant to be a Leonardo da Vinci. It had all the hallmarks of the master. The sfumato technique, where the colors blended into one another like smoke. The mysterious smile that did not quite reach the eyes. The delicate positioning of the hands. Julian stared at it with hunger. He whispered to himself that it was perfect. He whispered that it was going to save his legacy. I stood there clutching the trash bag, and I felt the blood drain from my face. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. I felt a wave of nausea roll through my stomach. I took a step closer. I could not stop myself. My eyes narrowed. I focused on the pigment of the woman's blue robe. It was a rich and deep blue. It was vibrant. It was commanding. It was almost hypnotic. And it was impossible. My mind raced through the catalog of chemical compounds I had memorized 40 years ago. I thought about the history of pigments. I thought about the grinding of lapis lazuli. I thought about the trade routes of the 15th century. I stared at that blue robe, and I knew with absolute certainty that Julian Thorpe was about to destroy his life. The blue was Prussian blue. I knew the texture of it. I knew how it absorbed the light. Prussian blue was a synthetic pigment. It was not invented until the early 18th century. Leonardo da Vinci died in 1519. He had been dead for 200 years before that specific shade of blue existed on this earth. The painting was not just a fake. It was a lazy fake. It was a forgery created by someone who knew how to paint like a master, but did not know the chemistry of history. I felt a familiar anger rising in my chest. It was the anger of the expert who sees something beautiful being corrupted by a lie. I forgot about the mop. I forgot about the uniform. I forgot that I was Betty the cleaner, who lived in a basement apartment in Queens. I was Elizabeth Vance again. I was the Eye of Manhattan. And I was looking at a crime. Julian turned around suddenly. He finally saw me. He jumped as if he had seen a ghost. His eyes were wide and bloodshot. He looked at my blue uniform, and then at the mop bucket I had left in the doorway. His face twisted into a sneer of irritation. He asked me what the hell I was doing in there. He asked me if I knew how to knock. He told me to get out. He told me that he was in the middle of a deal that was worth more than my entire life. He turned back to the painting and sighed. He reached out to touch the frame. He was about to sign the papers that sat on his desk. He was about to wire money he did not have to a shell company that I suspected I knew the name of. I stood my ground. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady. I had not spoken in a professional capacity in 3 years. My voice felt rusty, but the truth was clawing its way up my throat. I could not let him do it. I could not let the art world be poisoned by this fraud. And perhaps deep down I wanted to prove that I still existed. I wanted to prove that even in a cleaner's uniform, I was smarter than the man in the $5,000 suit. I cleared my throat. The sound was loud in the silent office. Julian froze. He did not turn around. He just waited for me to leave. I did not leave. I took a breath that smelled of floor wax and fear. I spoke the words that would end my life as a cleaner and start something dangerous. "You should not buy that painting," I said. Julian whipped around. He looked at me with pure disbelief. He laughed a short and sharp laugh that sounded like glass breaking. He asked me to repeat myself. He looked at me like I was a cockroach that had suddenly learned to speak French. I stepped forward into the light. I let the trash bag fall to the floor. I pointed a red and chapped finger at the canvas. I said, "You should not buy it," I repeated, "because it is a fake." Julian stopped laughing. The silence that followed was heavier than the laughter had been. It was the kind of silence that sucks the air out of a room and leaves you gasping. He took 2 slow steps toward me. He looked at me not with curiosity, but with a mixture of pity and disgust. It was the look you give a dog that has just soiled the carpet. He crossed his arms over his chest and leaned back against the edge of his massive mahogany desk. The movement was casual, but the tension in his jaw told a different story. He was a man on the edge of a cliff, and I had just told him the ground was crumbling. He looked at my worn sneakers. He looked at the fraying hem of my blue polyester pants. He looked at the plastic name tag that was pinned crookedly to my chest. It said Betty. It did not say Elizabeth. It did not say expert. It said minimum wage. You think it is a fake, he said slowly. He tested the words on his tongue like they were spoiled milk. The cleaning lady thinks the $50 million Da Vinci is a fake. I do not think it, I said. My voice was low. I clasped my hands in front of me to stop them from trembling. I know it. And tell me, Betty, he said. His voice was dripping with sarcasm. It was thick and oily. Where did you get your degree in art history? Was it at the community college night school? Or did you read a blog post while you were scrubbing the urinals in the men's room? The insult landed like a slap across the face. I felt the heat rise up my neck. I felt the old shame burning in my gut. For 3 years I had swallowed my pride. I had cleaned up vomit and coffee spills. I had been invisible. But this man was not just insulting me. He was insulting the truth. He was about to humiliate himself and his family name because he was too arrogant to listen to a woman in a uniform. I took a deep breath. I could smell the stale coffee in the mug on his desk. I could smell the expensive cologne he wore. It smelled like cedar and arrogance. It is the pigment, I said. I tried to keep my voice steady. If you look at the robe the Virgin is wearing, it is Prussian blue. I don't care about the blue, he snapped. He pushed himself off the desk and walked toward me. He was tall. He loomed over me. I have had 3 different authenticators look at this piece. I have the papers right here. These are men with PhDs. These are men who run museums. And you are telling me they are wrong, and you are right. They are seeing what they want to see, I said. They are seeing the commission you are paying them. They are seeing the name Da Vinci and they are blinded by it. But chemistry does not lie. Pigment does not have an ego. Enough, he shouted. The word echoed off the high ceiling. I have heard enough. You are delusional. You are clearly disturbed. I want you out of my office. In fact, I want you out of my building. Mr. Thorpe, please, I said. I was pleading now. Not for my job, but for him. Just listen to me. If you wire that money, you will be ruined. The moment a spectrometer touches that canvas, the fraud will be exposed. You will be the laughingstock of New York. Your father's legacy will be destroyed. He froze. The mention of his father hit a nerve. I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. It was there for just a second, but then his pride slammed the door shut. He could not allow himself to be corrected by a cleaner. It would break his worldview. He pointed a shaking finger at the door. You are fired, he said. His voice was cold now. It was final. Pack your things. If you are not out of the building in 10 minutes, I will call security and have you dragged out. Stick to the toilets, Betty. That is clearly where you belong. The words hung in the air. Stick to the toilets. It was cruel. It was unnecessary. It was the kind of thing a small man says to make himself feel big. I looked at him. I really looked at him. I saw the fear behind the anger. I saw a boy who was terrified of failing. And in that moment I stopped being afraid of him. I felt a strange calm settle over me. It was the calm of someone who has nothing left to lose. I had already lost my reputation. I had lost my fortune. I had lost my family. Losing a minimum wage job was nothing compared to that. But I could not leave him to his fate. It was not in my nature. I respected Art too much to let a lie stand. I walked past him. He tensed up as if he thought I was going to attack him. I did not even look at him. I walked straight to his desk. There was a notepad sitting next to the gold pen set. It was heavy cream paper, with his initials embossed at the top. I picked up a black pen. The weight of it felt good in my hand. It felt familiar. It had been so long since I had held a pen for anything other than signing a timesheet. "What are you doing?" he demanded. "I told you to get out." I did not answer. I wrote 4 lines on the paper. I wrote them in my best script, the handwriting that had once authenticated Rembrandts and Picassos, the handwriting that had once been worth millions. Prussian blue was synthesized by Diesbach in Berlin. Year of discovery: 1704. Leonardo da Vinci died. 1519. Do not wire the money. I tore the page off the pad. The sound of the paper ripping was loud in the quiet room. I placed it gently on the center of his desk. I placed it right on top of the wire transfer authorization. Then I put the pen back in its holder. I turned to face him one last time. "My name is not Betty," I said. I stood tall. My back was straight. "My name is Elizabeth, and you are about to make the biggest mistake of your life." I walked to the door. I did not look back. I grabbed the handle of my mop bucket. I wheeled it out into the hallway. The wheels squeaked against the marble. It was a lonely sound. I left the door to his office wide open. I wanted him to watch me leave. I wanted him to see the dignity in my blue uniform. I walked down the long hallway toward the service elevator. My heart was pounding in my chest, but my head was high. I pressed the button for the lobby. As the elevator doors began to slide shut, I looked back down the hall. I could see into the office. Julian Thorpe was standing by the desk. He was looking at the piece of paper. He was staring at it. He was not moving. He looked like a statue. And then just before the doors closed and cut off my view, I saw him reach for his phone. I saw him pick it up and dial. I saw him pull the laptop toward him. He was checking the date. He was looking up the history of the color blue. The doors clicked shut, and I was alone in the metal box. I leaned my head back against the wall and closed my eyes. I had just lost my job. I had no money for rent. I had no references. But for the first time in 3 years, I felt like myself again. I smiled in the darkness of the elevator. I knew exactly what was going to happen next. He would read the date. He would realize the math was impossible. And then he would realize that the woman who cleaned his toilets was a genius. The next morning the sun struggled to get through the grime on my single window. I lived in a building in Queens where the elevator had been broken since 1998, and the hallway always smelled of boiled cabbage and wet wool. My apartment was 300 square feet of peeling beige paint and memories I tried to forget. I sat at my small Formica table with a cup of instant coffee. The steam rose up and fogged my glasses. It was 10 o'clock. Usually at this time, I would be sleeping after my night shift, but today I was awake. I was awake because I was unemployed. The silence in the apartment was loud. It was usually drowned out by the sound of traffic or the shouting of the couple next door. But today the world seemed to be holding its breath. I looked at my hands. They were red and dry from years of harsh chemicals. They were the hands of a cleaner, but for a few minutes last night, they had been the hands of an expert again. I rubbed my thumb over the callus on my palm. I wondered if I had made a mistake. I had my dignity, but dignity does not pay the rent. The landlord, Mr. Henderson, would come knocking on Tuesday for his $800. I had $42 in my checking account and a jar of coins on the fridge. I heard footsteps in the hallway. They were not the usual footsteps. The people in my building walked with a heavy tread. They walked like people who were carrying the weight of the world on their shoulders. They shuffled. They dragged their feet. But these footsteps were sharp. They were crisp. It was the sound of leather soles, hitting the linoleum with purpose. Click, click, click. The sound stopped right outside my door. I froze, I held my breath. I expected the footsteps to move on. I expected it to be a mistake. But then came the knock. It was 3 sharp raps. It was an authoritative knock. It was the knock of someone who was used to doors being opened for them. I stood up slowly. I tightened the belt of my faded pink bathrobe. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. The glass was scratched and cloudy, but I could see a distorted figure in a dark suit. I pulled back the chain, I turned the deadbolt. I opened the door. Julian Thorpe looked like an alien who had crash-landed in Astoria. His Italian suit was a deep charcoal gray that probably cost more than the entire building. His white shirt was crisp and bright against the dingy yellow walls of the hallway. He was holding a manila folder in one hand, and he looked uncomfortable. He looked like he was afraid to touch anything. He looked at me, and for a moment he did not know what to say. He was used to seeing me in a blue uniform with a hairnet. He was not used to seeing me in a bathrobe, with my gray hair loose around my shoulders. He cleared his throat. He looked down at his polished shoes, and then back up at my face. His eyes were tired. They were red-rimmed. He looked like a man who had stared into the abyss and the abyss had stared back. "May I come in?" he asked. His voice was not the booming voice of the CEO anymore. It was quieter. It was almost humble. I did not move aside. I stood in the doorway blocking his path. I had no reason to let him in. He had fired me. He had humiliated me. He had told me to stick to the toilets. "I do not think that is a good idea, Mr. Thorpe," I said. "I am not on the clock. And as you pointed out last night, I am just the cleaning lady. I am sure you have important business to attend to." "Please," he said. He took a step forward but stopped when I did not move. I looked up the pigment. I called the chemistry department at Columbia University at 3 in the morning. I woke up the department head. He confirmed everything you wrote. Prussian blue. 1704. "I know," I said simply. "I told you." "You were right," he said. The words seemed to cause him physical pain. He swallowed hard. "I stopped the wire transfer. I canceled the sale. If I had sent that money, I would be bankrupt this morning. You saved me $50 million. "You are welcome," I said. "Now if you will excuse me, I have to look for a new job, since my previous employer fired me for being right." I started to close the door. I wanted to close it. I wanted to shut him out and go back to my misery. It was safer in the misery. But he reached out and put his hand against the wood. It was a desperate gesture. "Wait," he said. "Elizabeth, please. I need to talk to you. I have a proposition." I hesitated. It was the use of my name. He had called me Betty for 3 years. He had never bothered to ask if it was my real name. But now he called me Elizabeth. I looked at his hand on my door. It was shaking slightly. I sighed. I opened the door wider and stepped back. He walked into my apartment. He looked around. He saw the peeling paint. He saw the stack of bills on the counter. He saw the instant coffee. He did not say anything. He walked to the small table and pulled out one of the metal chairs. He sat down gingerly. I remained standing. I crossed my arms over my chest. "Talk," I said. "I am listening." "I am in trouble," he said. He placed the manila folder on the table. "Serious trouble. That painting was supposed to be the centerpiece of the spring gala. It was supposed to put Thorpe Auction House back on the map. My father left me a lot of debt, Elizabeth. More than anyone knows. If this auction fails, the company fails. And now I have no centerpiece. I have a hole in my catalog and a reputation that is hanging by a thread. That sounds like a problem for your experts, I said. The ones with the PhDs. My experts are idiots, he said. He sounded bitter. Or they are corrupt. I don't know which is worse. They all signed off on that painting. Every single one of them. They missed a 200-year discrepancy in the pigment. But you didn't. He looked up at me. His eyes were intense. Who are you, Elizabeth, really? Because you are not just a cleaner. I had my security team run a background check on you this morning. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. I had been careful. I had changed my last name. I had created a new history. And what did they find, I asked. Nothing, he said. That is the problem. They found a birth certificate for an Elizabeth Vance, and then nothing for 40 years, until you showed up at my cleaning agency 3 years ago. You have no credit history, no rental history, no social media. You are a ghost. But ghosts don't know about Prussian blue. I read a lot, I said. It was a weak lie. Stop it, he said. He slammed his hand on the table. The coffee cup rattled. I don't have time for games. Someone tried to sell me a fake. Someone who knew exactly what my experts would look for, and exactly what they would miss. This wasn't just a forgery, it was a trap. And I walked right into it. And what do you want me to do about it, I asked. I cannot paint you a new Da Vinci. I want you to help me find out who did it, he said. I want you to look at the rest of the collection. If there is one fake, there could be more. I need eyes I can trust. I need eyes that can see the truth. I am retired, I said. I turned away from him. I walked to the window and looked out at the brick wall of the building next door. I do not do that anymore. I just want to be left alone. The shell company, he said to my back. The one selling the painting. I traced the ownership this morning. I did not turn around. I did not want to know. It does not matter. It is called Veritas Holdings, he said. The name hit me like a physical blow. My knees went weak. I grabbed the windowsill to support myself. Veritas Holdings. Truth Holdings. It was a sick joke. It was exactly the kind of joke he would make. I felt the blood rushing in my ears. The room seemed to tilt. Veritas was the name of the newsletter my father had started in 1960. It was the name of the boat we used to sail on in the summers. It was a family name. Who runs it? I whispered. My voice was barely audible. The paperwork is buried deep, Julian said. But the initial incorporation documents were signed by a lawyer in the Cayman Islands. We dug deeper. We found a beneficiary name hidden in the trust. I turned around slowly. I knew the name before he said it. I could feel it in the air. It tasted like bile in my throat. Gavin Ross, Julian said. The world stopped. Gavin, my nephew. The boy I had raised like a son. The boy I had taught to mix paints. The boy I had taught to spot a forgery from across the room. The boy who had framed me for creating fakes 3 years ago and stolen my entire life. He was doing it again. He was not satisfied with destroying me. Now he was using my techniques to destroy others. He was out there living in my townhouse, spending my money and laughing at the world. And he was using the name Veritas to do it. The anger that exploded in my chest was not the dull ache I had lived with for 3 years. It was a hot and white fire. It burned away the fear. It burned away the shame. It burned away the cleaner. I looked at Julian Thorpe. I looked at his desperate face and his expensive suit. He was just a pawn. Gavin was playing him just like he had played me. You said you want to hire me, I said. My voice was different now. It was hard. It was cold. Yes, Julian said. He saw the change in my face. He sat up straighter. I can pay you. I can pay you whatever you want. I do not want your money, I said. I walked back to the table. I placed my hands flat on the surface and leaned in close to him. I want access. I want to see every single document related to that sale. I want to see every painting in your vault. And when we find him, I want to be the one who destroys him." Julian looked at me. He saw the fire in my eyes. He nodded slowly. "Deal, but you can't come back as a cleaner. You need a title." "Consultant," I said. "And one more thing." "What?" he asked. "I am going to need a better suit," I said. "And you are paying for it." The suit arrived in a black garment bag that smelled of cedar and money. It was a charcoal wool blazer with a silk lining and matching trousers that were tailored to within an inch of their life. I laid it out on my lumpy mattress and ran my hands over the fabric. It had been 3 years since I had touched anything made of 100% wool. For 3 years my skin had known only polyester blends and industrial cotton. I took a shower and scrubbed my skin until it was red. I wanted to scrub away the smell of the bleach and the floor wax. I wanted to scrub away Betty. I dried my hair and pinned it back into a tight chignon. I did not have my old makeup, but I had a tube of red lipstick that I had kept in the bottom of my drawer for a special occasion. I applied it carefully. The woman in the cracked bathroom mirror looked back at me. She was older than the woman I remembered. Her face had more lines and her eyes were more guarded. But the set of her jaw was the same. It was the jaw of a woman who was done apologizing. I put on the suit. It fit like a second skin. It fit like armor. I stepped into the black heels Julian had sent. They pinched my toes, but the pain was grounding. It reminded me that I was walking into a battle. I took a cab to the auction house. I did not take the subway. I used the corporate credit card Julian had left in the envelope. When the car pulled up to the curb in front of the Thorpe building, it was 9 o'clock in the morning. The sidewalk was crowded with people rushing to work. They were drinking coffee and checking their phones. Usually I arrived at 10 at night and entered through the loading dock in the alley. I would sign in with the night guard and put on my blue smock. Today I walked up the front steps. I walked through the revolving brass doors. The lobby was cavernous and smelled of fresh lilies. The floors gleamed under the chandeliers. They gleamed because I had polished them 8 hours ago. I felt a strange sense of ownership as my heels clicked on the marble. I knew every inch of this floor. I knew which tiles were loose and which corners gathered dust. I walked straight to the reception desk. The receptionist was a young woman named Jessica. She was 22, and she spent most of her time texting her boyfriend under the desk. I knew this because I emptied her trash can every night and saw the wrappers from the candy bars she hid. She did not look up when I approached. She was busy typing on her computer. "I am here to see Julian Thorpe," I said. My voice was clear and projecting. Jessica stopped typing. She looked up with a bored expression that froze on her face. She squinted at me. She tilted her head. She recognized the voice. She recognized the face. But she could not reconcile the woman in the $3,000 suit with the woman who collected her garbage. Her mouth opened slightly. "Betty," she whispered. She looked around as if this were a prank. "What are you doing here? You can't be in here. The service entrance is around the back." "My name is Elizabeth Vance," I said. I placed my hands on the marble counter. "And I am not here to empty your bin, Jessica. I am here for the 10 o'clock strategy meeting. Please let Mr. Thorpe know I have arrived." She stared at me. She blinked rapidly. The phone on her desk began to ring, but she ignored it. But she stammered, You clean the..." "Not anymore," I said. "Now call him." She fumbled for the phone. She dialed with shaking fingers. She whispered into the receiver and her eyes never left my face. A moment later the elevator doors opened and Julian walked out. He looked tired, but he had shaved and put on a fresh tie. He walked across the lobby with a stride that commanded attention. He stopped next to me. He did not look at Jessica. "Right on time," he said. "Shall we?" He gestured toward the elevators. I turned and walked with him. I could feel Jessica's eyes burning into my back. I could feel the eyes of the security guard, who had once searched my bag to make sure I wasn't stealing toilet paper. We stepped into the executive elevator. It was lined with mirrors. I looked at myself standing next to the CEO. We looked like partners, we looked like power. The doors opened on the 42nd floor. The hallway was busy with assistants carrying files and coffee. The conference room was at the end of the hall. The glass walls were frosted, so you could only see shapes moving inside. Julian opened the door and held it for me. The room went silent. There were 5 men sitting around the long oval table. I recognized all of them. They were the senior experts, the department heads. There was Dr. Aris, the head of Old Masters. There was Mr. Sterling, the head of Impressionism. They were men who had spent their lives in academia. They were men who wore tweed jackets and smelled of pipe tobacco and self-importance. They had walked past me 1,000 times in the hallway and never once said good evening. To them I was part of the infrastructure. I was less than a ghost. "Gentlemen," Julian said. He stood at the head of the table. "I would like to introduce you to our new lead consultant. This is Elizabeth Vance. She will be auditing the entire Spring Gala catalog, effective immediately." Dr. Aris adjusted his thick glasses. He peered at me. He frowned. "I don't understand," he said. His voice was nasally and irritated. "We have already authenticated the catalog, Julian. And who is this woman? She looks familiar." "She should," Julian said. "She has been cleaning your offices for 3 years. She is the one who found the Prussian blue in the Da Vinci, while you were all busy congratulating yourselves on a $50 million mistake." The silence that followed was total. It was absolute. You could hear the hum of the projector. You could hear the traffic 42 floors down. Dr. Aris turned a shade of red that clashed with his tie. Mr. Sterling dropped his pen. They looked at me with a mixture of horror and disbelief. They were not just embarrassed, they were offended. The idea that the cleaning lady had outsmarted them was an insult to their degrees and their tenure. "This is preposterous," Dr. Aris sputtered. He stood up. "You are taking the word of the janitorial staff over the head of the department. I will not stand for this insult, Julian." "Then sit down," I said. My voice cut through the room. I walked to the table. I did not sit. I walked to the stack of files in the center. I picked up the catalog for the upcoming auction. It was a glossy book with high-resolution photos of the paintings. I flipped it open to page 10. "A Vermeer," I said. "The music lesson. Estimated value $80 million. "It is a masterpiece," Dr. Aris said. He was trembling with rage. "It has been in a private collection in Geneva for 50 years. The provenance is impeccable." "Geneva," I said. "Interesting. And before that?" "It was lost during the war," he said dismissively. "Like many great works." I took the liberty of looking at the high-resolution scans. "This morning on the server," I said. "Julian gave me the password. Did any of you look at the cracking pattern on the varnish? Specifically in the upper left quadrant near the window?" "Of course we did," Mr. Sterling snapped. "It is consistent with 17th century drying patterns." "It is consistent with baking," I said. "It is consistent with a canvas that has been put in a thermal oven to induce premature cracking. Real age cracks are random. They follow the stress lines of the wood stretcher. These cracks are uniform. They are spiderwebs. They are too perfect. Nature is never perfect, gentlemen. Only liars are perfect." I tossed the catalog back onto the table. It slid across the polished wood and stopped in front of Dr. Aris. "I want to see the painting," I said. "I want to see it under a microscope, and I want to see the rest of the collection. Because if the Da Vinci is a fake and the Vermeer is questionable, then we have a rot in this building. And I am going to cut it out." Julian looked at his team. He looked at their flushed faces and their shifting eyes. He saw the doubt creeping in. He saw that they were afraid. Not of me, but of being wrong. You heard her, Julian said. Take her to the vault. Give her everything she asks for. If she wants to scrape the paint off the Mona Lisa, you hand her a knife. Dr. Aris looked like he was going to have a stroke, but he nodded. He had no choice. The power had shifted. The hierarchy had been inverted. I turned and walked toward the door. I did not wait for them to follow. I knew where the vault was. I had cleaned the door handle 1,000 times, but I had never been inside. Today I was going inside. The vault was in the basement. It was a climate-controlled fortress, with steel walls and a biometric lock. Dr. Aris swiped his card and scanned his thumb. The heavy steel door hissed open. A blast of cool air hit my face. It smelled of canvas and old oil paint. It was the smell of my childhood. It was the smell of my life. We walked into the rows of metal racks. Hundreds of millions of dollars of art hung on the wire mesh screens. It was quiet down here. It was a tomb for beautiful things. Show me the Vermeer, I said. Dr. Aris pulled out a rack. The painting was there. It was small. It was intimate. It was beautiful. But as I leaned in close, as I adjusted the light, I felt a sickness in my stomach. The technique was flawless. The light was perfect. But the soul was missing. It was dead behind the eyes. And then I saw it. A tiny hair caught in the paint near the bottom edge. A synthetic fiber from a modern brush. It was microscopic. But to me it was a screaming siren. My nephew is getting sloppy, I whispered to myself. What did you say? Dr. Aris asked. I said we have a problem, I answered. Pull the Rembrandts. Pull the Turners. Pull everything that came from Veritas Holdings. We are going to be here all night. I took off my blazer and hung it on the back of a chair. I rolled up the sleeves of my silk blouse. I put on a pair of white cotton gloves. I was not Betty the cleaner anymore. I was not even Elizabeth Vance the consultant. I was the hunter, and I had picked up the scent of the prey. The air inside the vault was kept at a constant 68 degrees, with 50% humidity. It was a climate designed to preserve canvas and wood, but it chilled human bone to the marrow. We had been down there for 8 hours. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. Dr. Aris and Mr. Sterling had left hours ago. They had stomped out with their bruised egos and their briefcases, leaving Julian and me alone, in the silence of the steel room. I sat on a rolling stool in front of a landscape painting, attributed to the 19th century master Turner. My eyes burned. My back ached in the way it used to ache when I sat in boardrooms, but this was a good ache. It was the ache of work. It was the ache of purpose. I adjusted the magnifying loupe over my right eye and leaned in until my nose was almost touching the varnish. The smell of the painting was complex. It smelled of linseed oil and resin, but underneath that there was the faint chemical scent of something too new, something that did not belong in 1840. Julian was sitting on the floor, with his back against a metal shelving unit. He had discarded his suit jacket and loosened his tie. He was eating a cold slice of pizza from a box we had ordered an hour ago. He watched me with the intensity of a man watching a bomb disposal expert. He did not speak. He let me work. He understood that silence was a tool, just as much as the blacklight or the microscope. I moved the light across the surface of the painting. I was looking for the soul of the artist. A real Turner was a storm of emotion. It was chaotic and violent. The brushstrokes were fast. You could feel the speed of his hand. You could feel the wind he was painting. But this painting was polite. The brushstrokes were careful. They were mimicking chaos rather than embodying it. It was the difference between a scream and a drawing of a scream. It is too perfect, I said softly. I sat back and rubbed my eyes. A master makes mistakes. He changes his mind. He paints a tree and then decides it should be a cloud. We call them pentimenti, the regrets of the artist. You can see them under the X-ray, or sometimes even with the naked eye, if you look for the shadow of the paint underneath. And this one, Julian asked. He put down his pizza crust and wiped his hands on a napkin. This one has no regrets, I said. The artist knew exactly where every stroke was going, because he was copying a photograph or a projection. There is no hesitation. There is no struggle. It is technically flawless and completely dead. Julian stood up. He walked over to where I was sitting. He looked at the painting. It was a swirling seascape of gold and gray. To the untrained eye, it was a masterpiece. To Julian's eye, it was an asset, worth $12 million. But now he was starting to see what I saw. He was starting to see the lie. That makes 5, he said. His voice was hollow. The Da Vinci, the Vermeer, 2 Rembrandts, and now the Turner. That is over $150 million in inventory. If this gets out, Thorpe Auction House is finished. We will be sued into oblivion. It is worse than that, I said. I took off the loupe and placed it on the metal tray. These are not just random forgeries, Julian. These are specific. The style of the underpainting, the mixture of the varnish, the way the signature is aged, using dust from vacuum cleaner bags to mimic centuries of grime. I know this technique. I know it because I taught it. You taught someone to forge paintings, Julian asked. He looked at me with a sudden sharpness. I taught someone to restore them, I corrected. I taught a young man how to mix pigments, to match the old masters so he could repair damage. I taught him how to age a patch of new varnish so it would blend in with the original. I taught him the chemistry of history. I thought I was teaching him to be a guardian of art. I did not realize I was giving him the keys to the kingdom of fraud. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling slightly. It was not from the cold. It was from the memory of Gavin. I remembered him as a boy of 20. He had been so eager. He had been so hungry for my approval. I remembered the day I showed him how to mix the perfect shade of lapis lazuli. He had looked at me with wide eyes and told me I was a wizard. I had loved him. I had loved him more than I loved the art. And he had used that love to blind me, while he signed my name to documents that would ruin me. It is Gavin, I said, my nephew. He is the one behind Veritas Holdings. He is the one flooding your vault with these beautiful lies. Julian was silent for a long moment. He walked away from the painting and began to pace the narrow aisle between the racks. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Why, he asked. Why is he doing this? He ruined you 3 years ago. He has your money. He has your reputation. Why come after me? Why come after Thorpe? Because he is greedy, I said, but also because he is vindictive. He hates the establishment. He hates the old guard. He wants to prove that he is smarter than the experts. He wants to hang a lie on the wall of a museum and have people adore it. It is the ultimate power trip. And you were the perfect target, Julian. Why me? Julian asked. He stopped pacing and looked at me. Because you were desperate, I said. I turned on my stool to face him. Forgers smell desperation like sharks smell blood. You were trying to live up to your father's legacy. You needed a win. You needed the Da Vinci to be real so badly that you stopped asking questions. Gavin knew that. He played on your grief and your insecurity. Julian flinched. The truth hit him hard. He leaned back against the steel rack and slid down until he was sitting on the floor again. He put his head in his hands. He looked like a little boy lost in a library. My father never trusted me, Julian said quietly. His voice was muffled by his hands. He built this business from nothing. He started with a storefront in Brooklyn and built it into an empire. He used to tell me that I didn't have the eye. He said I was a numbers man. He said I didn't understand the romance of the business. When he died, he left me the CEO title, but he left the control of the trust to the board. I have been fighting for 2 years to prove him wrong. I wanted to make the biggest sale in the history of the house. I wanted to show him that I could do it. I looked at him. I saw the weight he was carrying. It was heavy, it was crushing. I slid off my stool and sat on the cold concrete floor next to him. We were two broken people, sitting in a vault full of fake treasures. My father was a watchmaker, I said. He spent his life looking at tiny gears through a magnifying glass. He taught me to look at the details. He taught me that the truth is always in the smallest thing. When Gavin came to live with me after my sister died, I tried to teach him the same thing. I thought if I gave him a skill he would be safe. I thought if I taught him to see the truth, he would be an honest man. I was wrong. Talent is not morality. You can be a genius and a monster at the same time. So what do we do? He asked. We can't sell these, we have to cancel the auction. The stock will tank. The creditors will come for the building. I will lose everything my father built. No, I said. I felt a steel rod stiffen in my spine. We do not cancel. If we cancel, Gavin wins. He walks away with the money he has already made, and he starts over somewhere else. He will find another victim. We have to stop him. We have to burn him down. How? Julian asked. We have the gala in 3 days. The catalog is printed. The invitations are sent. We let the gala happen, I said. We let him think he has won. We let him come to the auction to watch his victory lap. And then we spring the trap. What trap? Julian asked. We are going to audit every single piece in this vault, I said. We are going to find every single fake he has planted. And then on the night of the auction we are going to put them on stage. Not to sell them, but to expose them. We are going to give the world a lesson in truth. But first we need proof. We need more than just my word and your regret. We need to find where he is making them. He covers his tracks, Julian said. Veritas Holdings is a ghost ship. Paint needs to dry, I said. Varnish needs to set. These forgeries are new. That means he has a studio nearby. You cannot ship wet oil paintings from overseas. The cracking process requires heat. He needs industrial ovens. He needs a large space with ventilation. He is here in New York, Julian. I can smell him. I stood up. My knees cracked, but I did not care. I reached out a hand to Julian. He looked at it for a second. It was a hand that had scrubbed his floors yesterday. Today it was a hand that was offering him salvation. He took it. His grip was strong. I pulled him to his feet. We have work to do, I said. Get the coffee. I am going to examine the Impressionists. If he has touched the Monets, I am going to personally strangle him. Julian smiled. It was a small and tired smile, but it was real. You are terrifying, Elizabeth, he said. I am a woman who has been underestimated for 3 years, I said. That makes me dangerous. Now bring me the blacklight. We are going to find the ghost. The sun was threatening to rise over Manhattan. But down in the basement loading dock, time felt suspended. We had left the climate-controlled silence of the vault and entered the gritty reality of the shipping bay. The air here was different. It smelled of diesel fumes and wet cardboard, and the peculiar metallic tang of the East River. The loading dock was a cavernous space filled with shadows, and the hulking shapes of wooden crates stacked like coffins. I walked down the concrete ramp. My heels made a sharp clicking sound that echoed off the corrugated metal walls. Julian followed close behind me. He had rolled up his sleeves and discarded his tie somewhere on the 42nd floor. He looked less like a billionaire CEO and more like a man who had been dragged through a hedge backward. We were looking for the crate that the fake Da Vinci had arrived in. It should be in the holding bay, Julian said. His voice was raspy with exhaustion. We keep the high-value packaging for 30 days in case of returns, though we never expect to return a Da Vinci. We are returning this one, I said. We are returning it to sender with a vengeance. I scanned the labels on the wooden crates. There were hundreds of them. Some were small and delicate. Some were large enough to hold a statue. I was looking for a specific type of wood. Gavin was a creature of habit. He liked to use Baltic birch for his crates because it was sturdy and didn't warp. He was obsessive about protecting his lies. I moved through the aisles, running my hand over the rough wood surfaces. I got a splinter in my thumb, but I did not stop. I felt the vibration of a subway train, passing somewhere deep beneath us. The floor trembled. It felt like the city was waking up. Here, I said. I stopped in front of a large flat crate, marked with the red stencil of the Thorpe auction house. But underneath the stencil, I could see the grain of the birch plywood. It was high quality. It was expensive. I pulled a small folding knife from the pocket of my blazer. I had found it in the utility drawer in the kitchen. It was a tool I used to open boxes of detergent. Now I jammed the blade into the seam of the crate and pried. The wood groaned. It was a sound like a dying animal. Julian stepped forward and grabbed the edge of the lid. Together we heaved. The nails shrieked as they were pulled from the wood. The lid came free and clattered to the concrete floor. The crate was empty except for the custom-cut foam padding. I leaned in. I sniffed the air inside the box. It smelled of fresh sawdust and something else. Something sweet and chemical, turpentine. But not just any turpentine. It was rectified turpentine mixed with dammer varnish. It was the smell of a fresh painting. A painting that had been packed before it was fully cured. He was in a rush, I whispered. He packed it too soon. The solvents are still outgassing. Does that help us find him? Julian asked. He was leaning against a stack of pallets, rubbing his temples. Look at the foam, I said. I pointed to the gray padding. It is laser cut. You can see the scorch marks on the edges. And look at the stenciling on the outside of the crate. The shipping label has been scraped off, but the wood is still stained. I knelt down on the dirty floor. I did not care about my $3,000 suit. I shone the flashlight from my phone onto the side of the crate, where the shipping manifest had been glued. The paper was gone, scraped away by a razor blade. But the glue residue remained, and trapped in the glue was a tiny fragment of the original label. It was just a corner. It was smaller than a postage stamp. I adjusted the light. I squinted until my eyes watered. I could make out 3 letters and a number. VYYD 4. VYYD, I repeated. I closed my eyes and let my mind work. I thought about the geography of the city. I thought about where an artist would find a studio, big enough to house an industrial oven and a laser cutter. Navy Yard, I said. Brooklyn Navy Yard. Building 4. The Navy Yard is huge, Julian said. There are hundreds of tenants. Tech startups, movie studios, manufacturers, and artists, I said. Gavin always loved the industrial aesthetic. He loved the idea of making art in a factory. Building 4 is the old timber shed. It has high ceilings and heavy freight elevators. It is perfect for moving large canvases without being seen. Julian stared at me. A slow smile spread across his tired face. It was the first time I had seen him smile with genuine hope. You are incredible, he said. How do you know all this? I told you, I said, standing up and brushing the dust from my knees. I read a lot. And I spent 30 years tracking down lost art. You learn to look at the container, not just the content. Let's go, Julian said. He grabbed his car keys from his pocket. My car is in the garage. We took the freight elevator up to the parking level. Julian's car was a sleek black sedan that looked like a shark on wheels. It smelled of leather and silence. As we drove out of the garage and into the gray morning light of Manhattan, I felt a strange sense of dislocation. Yesterday I had been taking the bus to work. Today I was riding shotgun in a luxury car, on my way to hunt down a criminal. We merged onto the bridge. The city skyline was purple and gold against the rising sun. It was beautiful. It was the city I used to own. Can I ask you something? Julian said. He kept his eyes on the road. His hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly. His knuckles were white. You can ask, I said. I watched the suspension cables of the bridge flash by like the strings of a giant harp. Why didn't you fight back? He asked. 3 years ago, when he framed you. You are the smartest person I have ever met. You could have destroyed him then. Why did you disappear? Why did you become a cleaner? I looked out at the water below us. It was dark and churning. The question was a knife twisting in an old wound. I had asked myself the same thing every night for 1,000 nights. Why had I run? Why had I let him win? Because he was family, I said softly. I could not send my sister's son to prison. I thought if I just stepped away he would stop. I thought he just wanted the money. I thought if I gave him the firm he would be satisfied. I was trying to save him from himself. I took the fall to protect his future. And he repaid you by erasing your past, Julian said. There was anger in his voice. He didn't just take your firm, Elizabeth. He took your name. He took your life. I know, I said, that was my mistake. I confused love with weakness. I thought mercy was a virtue. But mercy without justice is just cowardice. I was a coward, Julian. I was afraid to face the monster I had created. You are not a coward, Julian said. He glanced at me. His eyes were fierce. A coward would have stayed in that apartment. A coward would have let me buy that fake painting. You came back. That is what matters. I felt a lump form in my throat. I swallowed it down. I did not cry. Elizabeth Vance did not cry. Thank you, I said, but do not make me into a hero. I am doing this for revenge. I am doing this to take back what is mine. Whatever the reason, Julian said. I am glad you are on my side. We turned off the highway and navigated the maze of streets leading to the Navy Yard. The area was a mix of crumbling brick warehouses and gleaming new glass structures. It was a place of transformation. We approached the security gate. Julian flashed his ID and told the guard we were there for a site inspection of a potential storage unit. The guard waved us through. We drove slowly past the dry docks, where massive ships used to be built. Now they were filled with weeds and water. Building 4, Julian said, pointing to a massive brick structure on the waterfront. It looks abandoned. It is not abandoned, I said. Look at the windows on the 3rd floor. Blackout curtains, and look at the ventilation fans on the roof. They are spinning. Someone is generating a lot of heat inside that building. Julian parked the car behind a rusted dumpster. We got out. The wind off the river was cold and smelled of salt. I buttoned my blazer. I felt the weight of the moment pressing down on me. Inside that building was the proof we needed. Inside that building was the ghost of my past, waiting to be exorcised. How do we get in? Julian asked. We can't just knock. The fire escape, I said, pointing to the rusted metal stairs, clinging to the side of the building. Gavin never locks the fire escape. He likes to smoke on the landing. We walked toward the building. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I was 62 years old. I was climbing a fire escape to break into a warehouse. It was insane. It was dangerous. And it was the most alive I had felt in years. I reached up and pulled down the ladder. It groaned, but it held. I looked at Julian. After you, I said. He climbed. I followed. We were ascending into the belly of the beast, and I was ready to sharpen my claws. The metal grating of the fire escape landing vibrated under my feet. The wind off the East River was biting, and it whipped loose strands of hair across my face, but I did not brush them away. My hands were occupied with the window sash. It was an old industrial window, with wire mesh embedded in the glass, and layers of black paint sealing the frame. I dug my fingernails into the gap at the bottom. The paint flaked away in brittle chips that stuck to my skin. I pushed upward. My shoulders burned with the effort. I was 62 years old, and I was breaking and entering. I gritted my teeth and pushed harder. I thought about the days when I used to lift heavy gilded frames without breaking a sweat. I channeled that strength. With a groan of rusted metal, the window slid up 6 inches. It was enough. The smell rushed out to meet me. It was a smell that hit me in the gut, like a physical blow. It was the smell of my past, distorted into something monstrous. Turpentine and lavender oil, mixed with the acrid scent of baking varnish. and the ozone tang of high-voltage lamps. It was the smell of a studio, but it was too clean. It was too chemical. I slid my fingers under the sash and heaved it up another foot. Julian was right behind me on the ladder. I could hear his heavy breathing. I swung my leg over the sill. My suit trousers snagged on a rough piece of metal, but I didn't care. I dropped down onto the floor inside. My heels made a hollow thud on the wooden planks. I crouched low immediately. My heart was hammering against my ribs, so hard I thought it would crack them. I waited for an alarm. I waited for a shout. But there was only the hum of ventilation fans, spinning in the darkness. "Are we clear?" Julian whispered from the window. He was straddling the sill, looking like a man who was regretting every life choice that had led him to this moment. "We are clear," I whispered back. "Get in. And do not touch anything." Julian dropped down beside me. We stood up slowly and let our eyes adjust to the gloom. The space was enormous. It was a cathedral of industry. The ceiling soared 20 feet above us, lost in shadow. But the floor was a grid of workstations, illuminated by the faint blue glow of standby lights on expensive machinery. It did not look like an artist's studio. It looked like a laboratory. It looked like a hospital where the patients were canvases and the doctors were liars. We began to walk down the center aisle. To my left there was a row of large tables, covered in glass beakers and digital scales. This was the chemistry station. I paused to look at a jar of yellow powder. "Orpiment," I whispered. "Arsenic sulfide. Highly toxic. Used in ancient manuscripts and by the Dutch masters. You cannot buy this at an art supply store. You have to synthesize it or buy it on the black market." "He is making his own paint," Julian said. He sounded horrified. "From scratch." "He has to," I said. "Modern paints have molecular markers. Carbon dating would pick them up in a second. If you want to fool a spectrometer, you have to paint like it is 1650. You have to grind the stones yourself. You have to mix the oil yourself." I walked past the chemistry station to the next zone. This was the aging station. It was a nightmare of ingenuity. There were 3 large industrial ovens with digital temperature controls. Inside one of them, through the glass door, I could see a canvas baking. The heat would shrink the paint layers at different rates, causing them to crack. It mimicked 400 years of expansion and contraction in 4 hours. Next to the ovens was a specialized vacuum table. It was covered in a fine gray dust. I ran my gloved finger through it. "What is this?" Julian asked. "Dirt. Vacuum cleaner dust," I said. The bitterness in my voice was acid. "He collects it. He separates it by density. Then he rubs it into the cracks of the varnish to simulate centuries of grime. He is literally rubbing the dirt of New York City into these paintings to give them a soul." We moved deeper into the room. We reached the storage racks. This was the heart of the operation. There were dozens of paintings drying on the racks. I pulled one out. It was a landscape. A sweeping valley with a stormy sky. It was beautiful. It was breathtaking. And it was signed John Constable, 1821. My hand shook as I held the frame. The technique was perfect. The brushwork was loose and confident. Gavin had captured the very essence of Constable's obsession with clouds. It was not just a copy. It was a performance. "He is a genius," I said softly. It was a painful admission. He could have been one of the greatest restorers in history. He could have saved masterpieces. Instead, he is creating ghosts. "Look at this," Julian called out. He was standing in front of a large corkboard on the far wall. I walked over to him. The board was covered in photographs and printouts. It was a timeline. It was a production schedule. There were photos of the paintings in the Thorpe Spring Gala catalog, the Da Vinci, the Vermeer, the Rembrandts, and next to each photo was a checklist. pigment analysis, cracking pattern, provenance documents, aging protocol. It was a factory assembly line. But what chilled me most was the column on the far right. It was titled Buyer Profile. I leaned in closer. Under the photo of the fake Da Vinci was Julian's name, and under his name were notes. Desperate for legacy when father issues. Will not run full forensic panel. Vulnerable to discovery obsession. He profiled me, Julian said. His voice was shaking with rage. He didn't just paint a picture. He painted a trap. He knew exactly what buttons to push. He knew I would be too eager to check the science. He profiled everyone, I said, pointing to the other names. Collectors. Museums. Hedge fund managers. He studies their psychological weaknesses and creates the art that they are desperate to find. He sells them their own dreams. This is it, Julian said. He pulled out his phone and started taking pictures of the board. This is the proof. The timeline. The specific notes on the forgeries. We have him. We need more, I said. We need the link to the money. We need to connect this studio to Veritas Holdings. I turned to the large desk in the corner. It was a mess of papers and coffee cups. It was the only part of the room that felt human. I saw a half-eaten bagel. I saw a pack of cigarettes. And I saw a leather-bound ledger. I knew that ledger. I had given it to Gavin for his 30th birthday. It was Italian leather. I opened it. It was not a diary. It was an accounting log. But it was handwritten. Gavin was paranoid about digital trails, but he was arrogant enough to keep a physical trophy of his conquests. I flipped through the pages. It was all there. The sale of the fake Renoir to the Russian oligarch. The sale of the fake Matisse to the museum in Tokyo. And on the last page, the pending sale of the Da Vinci to Thorpe Auction House. $50 million. The account number listed for the wire transfer matched the one Julian had shown me. I found it, I said. The ledger. It connects the paintings to the bank accounts. I looked up at Julian to show him the book, but Julian was not looking at me. He was looking at the freight elevator doors at the far end of the room. The lights above the doors had just flickered from red to green. The heavy gears began to grind. A low hum filled the air. The elevator was moving. It was coming up. Someone is coming, Julian whispered. His eyes went wide. We have to go. We cannot go back out the window, I said. We will be seen on the fire escape. The elevator opens right facing the window. Hide, Julian hissed. He grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the rows of drying racks. We scrambled behind a wall of canvases. We squeezed ourselves into the narrow gap between a stack of empty frames and a large industrial fan. It was tight. I could smell the wool of Julian's suit and the fear sweating off him. I clutched the ledger to my chest like a shield. We crouched down in the shadows, just as the elevator arrived with a heavy clank. The metal doors slid open. Footsteps echoed on the wooden floor. They were confident footsteps. They were the footsteps of a man who owned the world. I held my breath. I knew that walk. I knew the rhythm of it. It was Gavin. I don't care what the tracker says, a voice boomed. It was him. My nephew. His voice was deeper than I remembered, but the arrogance was the same. He was on the phone. The wire didn't go through. Thorpe got cold feet. Or someone tipped him off. He walked past our hiding spot. I could see him through the slats of the frames. He was wearing a black turtleneck and jeans. He looked handsome. He looked successful. He did not look like a criminal. He looked like the boy I had raised. He walked to the desk. He slammed his hand down on the surface. "Where is the ledger?" he said. The silence that followed was terrifying. He had noticed it immediately. The desk was empty. I had the book in my arms. I squeezed my eyes shut. I prayed to a God I hadn't spoken to in years. Please don't let him look over here. Someone is here, Gavin said. His voice dropped to a whisper. It was a dangerous whisper. I can smell the perfume. I froze. I hadn't worn perfume in 3 years. But old habits die hard. When I put on the suit this morning, I had dabbed a tiny drop of Chanel No. 5 behind my ears. It was my signature scent. It was the scent of Elizabeth Vance. And Gavin knew it better than anyone. Aunt Elizabeth, he called out. His voice echoed in the cavernous room. It was mocking. It was playful. I know you are here. I smelled you the moment I walked in. Did you come to admire my work? Or did you come to steal from me again? Julian looked at me with panic in his eyes. He started to stand up to confront him, but I grabbed his wrist. I shook my head. Not yet. We were trapped. We were unarmed. And Gavin was holding a box cutter. I had seen him pick it up from the desk. Come out wherever you are, Gavin sang. He began to walk slowly down the aisle toward the drying racks. He dragged the blade of the box cutter along the metal shelving. Scrape. 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 I have missed you, Auntie. I really have. The cleaning lady disguise was a nice touch. Very humble. But you never could stay away from the art, could you? He was getting closer. He was 10 feet away. Then 5. I could see his shadow stretching across the floor. I looked at Julian. I saw the resolve harden in his face. He was not going to let me be hurt. But I was not going to let him fight my battle. This was between me and the boy I had loved. I took a deep breath. I stood up. Hello, Gavin, I said. I stepped out from behind the racks. I stood in the center of the aisle, under the harsh glare of the work lights. I held the ledger tight. I stood tall in my charcoal suit. Gavin stopped. He smiled. It was a wolf's smile. There she is, he said. The Eye of Manhattan. You look good, Elizabeth. Better than you did in that mugshot I arranged for you. And you look like a cheap copy of a great artist, I said. Just like your paintings. Gavin laughed. Cheap, he gestured around the room. This is genius, Elizabeth. This is the greatest performance art piece of the century. And you are trespassing in my studio. We are leaving, I said. And we are taking this ledger with us. We, Gavin asked. He tilted his head. Julian stepped out from the shadows behind me. He straightened his jacket. He looked Gavin in the eye. Yes, Julian said. We. Gavin's smile faltered for a fraction of a second when he saw the CEO of Thorpe Auction House. But then it returned wider than before. Mr. Thorpe, he said. What an honor. I see you brought your cleaning lady to the negotiation. That is very progressive of you. She is not a cleaning lady, Julian said. She is the woman who is going to send you to prison. I don't think so, Gavin said. He flicked the blade of the box cutter. The light caught the sharp edge. Because you are not walking out of here with that book. In fact, I don't think you are walking out of here at all. Gavin took a step forward, the box cutter catching the harsh overhead light. He held it casually like a painter holds a brush, but the intent was clear. He was cornered, and a cornered animal is unpredictable. Julian stepped in front of me, shielding me with his body. It was a noble gesture, but foolish. Gavin was younger, faster, and he had nothing to lose. I put a hand on Julian's arm and gently pushed him aside. I stepped forward. This was not a physical fight. This was a battle of wills. Put the knife down, Gavin, I said. My voice was calm. It was the voice I used to use when he was a teenager and had stayed out too late. You are not going to hurt us. You are a forger, not a murderer. There is a difference. Is there? Gavin sneered. I destroyed your life with the signature. Do you think I won't protect my investment with a blade? This studio is worth millions, Elizabeth. This studio is a crime scene, I interrupted. And I have the evidence right here. I held up the ledger. I have the bank accounts, the chemical formulas, the client list. It's over. Gavin stared at the leather book in my hands. His eyes darted from the ledger to the door, calculating the odds. He realized he couldn't get past both of us without a struggle. He realized that even if he hurt us, the noise would attract the security patrol outside. His face twisted. The charming facade cracked, revealing the panicked boy underneath. "You think that book is your weapon," Gavin whispered. "You think you can just walk out of here and ruin me again?" "I am not ruining you," I said. "I am stopping you." "No," Gavin said. He backed up. He backed toward the work table filled with flammable solvents. "You are not taking that book. And you are not taking my work." He reached out and grabbed a large glass jar of turpentine. He didn't throw it at us. He threw it at the floor between us. Crash! The glass shattered. The pungent liquid splashed across the wooden floorboards, creating a glistening pool that separated us from him. The fumes rose up instantly, thick and dizzying. "Gavin, don't!" Julian shouted, realizing what he was about to do. Gavin reached into his pocket and pulled out a silver lighter. He flicked the lid open. The flame danced in the stagnant air. "If I can't sell them," Gavin said, his voice trembling with a terrifying mixture of grief and rage, "then no one sees them. No evidence. No crime." "Gavin, the paintings," I cried out. "You'll destroy everything." "Better destroyed than in an evidence locker," he screamed. He dropped the lighter. Whoosh! The turpentine ignited with a roar. A wall of blue and orange flame shot up between us, feeding on the dry wood and the chemical fumes. The heat was instantaneous. It pushed us back. "The sprinklers," Julian yelled, shielding his face. Gavin hadn't thought about the sprinklers. He was too focused on the fire. But the building was old, and the fire suppression system was designed for a timber mill. Clang! Hisses! The pipes overhead groaned, and then the deluge began. It wasn't a gentle mist. It was a torrential downpour of brown, rusty, pressurized water. The water hit the fire, sending up clouds of hissing steam. But more importantly, the water hit the drying racks. Gavin screamed. It was a sound of pure agony. He watched as the heavy, dirty water pounded against the surfaces of his uncured masterpieces. "No," he wailed. He tried to run through the flames to get to the racks. "The varnish. It's not set." I watched in horror and fascination. The water was mixing with the fresh oil paint. The faces of his fake Rembrandts were dissolving. The landscapes of his fake Turners were running down the canvas in streaks of gray and brown. He hadn't just started a fire. He had triggered a flood. He was destroying his own creation with his panic. "We have to go," Julian grabbed my arm. "The smoke is getting too thick." Gavin was on his knees now, frantically trying to cover a melting canvas with his own jacket, sobbing as the paint smeared onto his clothes. He was lost. He was oblivious to us. "Come on." Julian pulled me toward the stairwell door. We burst into the concrete shaft and pounded down the metal steps. My heels clattered like gunfire. Julian was holding my arm, steadying me as we flew down the flights. We hit the ground floor and burst out the emergency exit into the alley. The cold air hit us, mixing with the adrenaline. We didn't stop. We ran to the car. Julian fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking. He unlocked the doors and we threw ourselves inside. He started the engine and peeled out of the lot, just as we heard sirens approaching in the distance. We drove in silence for 10 minutes, putting distance between us and the smoking building. Julian finally slowed down. As we merged onto the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway, he looked over at me. I was soaked to the bone from the sprinklers. My hair was plastered to my skull. My expensive suit was ruined. But the ledger was safe in my lap, dry under my blazer. "He did it," Julian said, his voice full of disbelief. He burned it down. He panicked, I said, shivering. He tried to destroy the evidence, but he ended up destroying the inventory. The water damage will ruin every uncured forgery in that room. He has nothing left to sell. But we have the book, Julian said, glancing at the ledger. We have the proof. Yes, I said. But we have something better. What? We have an invitation, I said. A slow smile spread across my face. The spring gala is tomorrow night. Gavin thinks he has destroyed the evidence. He thinks he can claim it was an accident, collect the insurance, and walk away. He doesn't know we have the ledger, Julian realized. And he doesn't know about the paintings we already have in your vault, I added. He will come to the gala. He has to. He needs to see if we cancel. He needs to play the role of the devastated artist. And when he shows up, Julian asked. When he shows up, I said, we are going to put on a show. We aren't just going to arrest him. We are going to dismantle him. Publicly. Irrevocably. We are going to use his own creations against him. I looked out the window at the city skyline. It looked different now. It didn't look like a place of exile. It looked like a stage. Take me to the office, I said. I need a new suit. And we have a presentation to prepare. You want to go back to work? Julian asked, laughing in disbelief. Elizabeth, you just escaped a fire. The gala starts in 30 hours, I said. I have 3 years of silence to make up for. I am not resting until Gavin Ross is in handcuffs, and my name is cleared. Julian nodded. He reached over and squeezed my hand. Let's go get him. We drove back toward Manhattan. The sun was fully up now, shining on the water. I held the ledger tight. It was heavy with the weight of greed and betrayal, but it was also the key to my freedom. I wasn't Betty anymore. I wasn't just a consultant. I was the eye of Manhattan. And tomorrow night, I was going to open everyone's eyes. The ballroom of the Pierre Hotel smelled of expensive perfume and old money. It was a scent I knew well from my former life. It was a mixture of white lilies and champagne, and the metallic tang of diamonds rubbing against silk. 500 people were packed into the gilded room. They were the elite of New York. They were hedge fund managers and museum curators and socialites who collected art the way other people collected shoes. They were buzzing with anticipation. The rumor mill had been working overtime. Everyone knew that Thorpe Auction House was in trouble. Everyone knew that tonight was either a resurrection or a funeral. I stood behind the heavy velvet curtain of the main stage and watched them through a small gap in the fabric. I was not wearing a blue uniform tonight. I was wearing a floor-length gown of black silk that Julian had procured from a designer in Paris. It was severe and elegant. It covered me from neck to wrist like armor. My hair was pulled back tight. My lips were painted a deep crimson. I was no longer Betty the cleaner. I was Elizabeth Vance the executioner. Julian stood next to me. He was adjusting his cufflinks for the 10th time. His hands were shaking. He looked pale under the stage lights. He was risking everything tonight. If this went wrong, he would not just be bankrupt. He would be a pariah. He would be the man who invited the city's wealthiest people to a gala and then accused them of being fools. He looked at me. His eyes were wide with fear. He asked me if I was sure about this. He asked me if we had enough proof. I reached out and took his hand. My skin was cool. My pulse was steady. I had spent 3 years scrubbing floors and being invisible. I had nothing left to fear from these people. I told him to look at the front row. I told him to look at who had just walked in. I pointed through the gap in the curtain. The double doors at the back of the room had opened. Gavin Ross walked in. He looked impeccable, in a tuxedo that fit him perfectly. He walked with the easy grace of a man who believes he is untouchable. He paused to shake hands with a board member. He smiled at a famous actress. He accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. He looked relaxed. He looked victorious. He thought he had won. He thought that because the auction was proceeding, it meant Julian had folded. He thought that we were going to sell his fakes to save the company and keep his secret. He thought the fire in the studio was just a setback. He did not know that the fire was just a distraction. He did not know that the real danger was standing 10 feet away from him, behind a velvet curtain. I watched him take his seat. He sat in the third row on the aisle. It was a strategic spot, close enough to be seen but far enough back to make a quick exit if necessary. He placed his program on his lap. He looked up at the stage. He looked at the covered easel in the center. Underneath that cloth was the Da Vinci, or at least what the world thought was a Da Vinci. Gavin smiled. It was a small and private smile. It was the smile of an artist, admiring his own work. I felt a surge of anger so hot, it almost took my breath away. He was mocking us. He was mocking the art. He was mocking the truth. The lights in the ballroom dimmed. The chatter died down to a low murmur. The spotlight hit the center of the stage. It was blindingly bright. Dust motes danced in the beam like tiny stars. Julian took a deep breath. He squared his shoulders. He looked at me one last time. I nodded. He walked out through the curtain. The applause was polite but tepid. The audience was waiting to see blood. They wanted to know if the boy king could save his father's empire. Julian walked to the podium. He gripped the sides of the lectern. The microphone whined slightly. He welcomed them. He thanked them for coming. His voice was strong. He spoke about the history of Thorpe Auction House. He spoke about his father. He spoke about the responsibility of being a custodian of history. The audience listened. They were bored. They wanted to see the painting. They wanted to see the $50 million masterpiece. Gavin looked at his watch. He drummed his fingers on his knee. He was impatient for the sale. He wanted his wire transfer. Julian paused. He looked out at the darkness. He looked directly at the third row. He said that tonight was going to be different. He said that usually an auction house is a place where we celebrate the past. But tonight he wanted to talk about the future. He wanted to talk about truth. A ripple of confusion went through the room. People shifted in their seats. This was not the standard script. This was not the sales pitch they were expecting. Julian turned and gestured to the curtain. He said that he could not do this alone. He said that he had brought in a special consultant to verify the evening's collection. He said that some of them might recognize her name. It was my cue. I stepped out from behind the velvet. The heels of my shoes clicked on the hardwood floor. I walked into the spotlight. I stood next to Julian. I looked out at the sea of faces. I saw the shock register in the front row. I saw the whispers start. I saw Dr. Aris drop his program. But I only cared about one face. I looked at the third row. I looked at Gavin. His face had gone pale. His mouth was slightly open. The glass of champagne in his hand tilted dangerously. He stared at me. He had seen me yesterday in his studio, soaked in water and smelling of smoke. He had not expected to see me here. He had not expected me to be standing on his stage. He looked trapped. He looked like a rat that realizes the cheese is poisoned. I stepped up to the microphone. I adjusted it. The sound of my breathing was amplified through the speakers. I introduced myself. I said my name is Elizabeth Vance. A gasp went through the room. They remembered. They remembered the scandal 3 years ago. They remembered the woman who had supposedly forged signatures and stolen money. They looked at me with suspicion. They looked at me with judgment. I did not flinch. I told them that for 30 years, I was the primary authenticator. for the most prestigious collections in New York. I told them that for the last 3 years, I had been a cleaner in this very building. I told them that while they were sleeping, I was polishing their floors. And while I was polishing their floors, I was looking at their art. I told them that art is a lie that tells the truth. I quoted Picasso. But then I said that sometimes art is just a lie. I said that tonight we were going to learn the difference. I signaled to the stagehands. 2 men walked out. They were carrying a large table. On the table was a microscope, a UV lamp, a bottle of solvent, a set of scalpels. The audience murmured. They were confused. This looked like a laboratory. It did not look like a gala. I walked over to the covered easel. I put my hand on the cloth. I felt the texture of the fabric. Underneath was the painting that had started it all. Underneath was the Virgin with the Prussian blue robe. I looked at Gavin. He was starting to stand up. He was looking for the exit. But the doors were closed. Security guards were standing in front of them. I had made sure of that. Julian had made sure of that. Gavin was not leaving. Not yet. I pulled the cloth away. The painting was revealed. The audience gasped. It was beautiful. It was glowing under the lights. It looked like a masterpiece. It looked like a fortune. I let them admire it for a moment. I let them fall in love with the lie. Then I picked up the UV lamp. I turned it on. The purple light washed over the canvas. I spoke into the microphone. I told them to look at the varnish. I told them to look at the fluorescence. I told them that old varnish glows green under UV light. I told them that new varnish glows blue. The painting on the stage was glowing a bright and electric blue. It was screaming its newness. It was screaming its deceit. I heard the murmurs turn into shouts. I heard the word fake being whispered. I heard the sound of a reputation shattering. I looked at Gavin. He had sunk back into his chair. He was gripping the armrests. His knuckles were white. He was not looking at the painting. He was looking at me. His eyes were filled with pure hatred, but underneath the hate there was fear. He knew what was coming next. He knew that the blue light was just the beginning. I picked up the scalpel. I held it up to the light. It glinted. I told the audience that we were going to go deeper. I told them we were going to look at the soul of the painting. And I told them exactly whose soul we were going to find. I dipped a cotton swab into the bottle of industrial solvent. It was a mixture of acetone and alcohol that smelled sharp and medical. It was a smell that cut through the perfume and the champagne. The audience leaned forward. They were watching a woman in a black gown, about to desecrate a masterpiece. Dr. Eris in the front row stood up and shouted. He yelled that I was insane. He yelled that I was destroying history. He tried to rush the stage, but the security guards held him back. I ignored him. I ignored the panic rising in the room. I focused on the painting. I focused on the delicate hand of the Virgin Mary. If this painting were real, the oil paint would be as hard as stone. It would be impervious to a gentle rub of solvent. It takes 50 years for oil paint to fully cure, and 500 years for it to become part of the canvas itself. But if this painting were a lie, the paint would surrender. I pressed the wet cotton against the canvas. I did not hesitate. I rubbed in a small circular motion. The crowd gasped in a collective intake of breath that sounded like the room was dying. I pulled the swab away. I held it up to the spotlight. The cotton was no longer white. It was bright blue. It was the color of the Prussian blue robe. I turned back to the painting. Where the Virgin's hand had been, there was now a smear of dissolved pigment, and the stark white of the gesso primer underneath. The paint had not just come off. It had melted. It was fresh. It was barely dry. It was a painting that had been born, not in the Italian Renaissance, but in a warehouse in Brooklyn, less than a month ago. It is wet, I said into the microphone. My voice was calm, but it thundered through the speakers. This masterpiece is still wet. The room erupted. It was chaos. People were shouting. People were taking photos. The illusion was shattered, and in its place was the raw and ugly truth. I looked down at the third row. Gavin Ross was not moving. He was staring at the blue smudge on the canvas. His face was a mask of shock. He had believed his own lie. He had believed he was better than the chemistry. He had believed he was better than me. "Stand up, Gavin," I said. I pointed at him. The spotlight operator followed my finger. The beam of light swung from the stage and hit Gavin in the chest. He flinched as if he had been struck. 500 heads turned to look at him. He was trapped in the glare. He was exposed. He looked small. He looked like a child who had been caught playing with matches. He stood up slowly. He straightened his tuxedo jacket. He tried to summon his arrogance, but it had deserted him. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, "I would like you to meet the artist. This is my nephew Gavin Ross. He is the owner of Veritas Holdings. He is the man who painted this forgery. And he is the man who framed me 3 years ago to steal my reputation so he could sell you lies." "It is not a lie," Gavin shouted. His voice cracked. He stepped into the aisle. He looked around the room with wild eyes. "It is art. It is beautiful. You all loved it 5 minutes ago. You were ready to pay $50 million for it. If I painted it and you couldn't tell the difference, then I am the master. I am the genius." "You are a criminal," Julian said. He stepped up to the microphone next to me. He held up the leather ledger we had taken from the studio. "And we have the receipts. We have the bank accounts, Gavin. We have the list of every fake you sold to every person in this room. We know about the Rembrandts. We know about the Vermeers. It is all here." The crowd turned on him. The admiration turned to fury. These were people who hated being tricked more than they hated losing money. They started to boo. They started to shout for the police. Gavin looked at them. He looked at the hate in their faces. He realized that his performance was over. He realized that he had not just lost the money, he had lost the audience. He looked at me one last time. There was no love in his eyes, but there was respect. It was the cold respect of one predator acknowledging another. "You ruined everything, Elizabeth." He screamed over the noise of the crowd. "You were supposed to be invisible. You were just the cleaning lady." "I was never just the cleaning lady," I said softly into the microphone. "I was the one cleaning up your mess." The double doors at the back of the room burst open. Police officers flooded in. They moved down the aisles with purpose. They surrounded Gavin. They put him in handcuffs. He did not fight. He held his head high as they led him away. He was still playing the role of the misunderstood genius. But as he passed the stage, he did not look at the painting. He looked at the floor. He knew that his legacy was nothing but a smear of blue paint on a cotton swab. The police let him out. The doors closed. The room was silent again. But it was a different kind of silence. It was the silence of a storm that has passed. Julian looked at me. He was smiling. It was a real smile. It was the smile of a man who had faced his demons and won. He took the microphone. "The auction is canceled," he said. "But the bar is open. And I believe we have a lot to discuss." The applause started slowly. It started with one person in the back, then another. Then the whole room was clapping. They were not clapping for the art. They were clapping for the truth. They were clapping for the woman in the black dress who had saved them from themselves. I looked out at them. I saw the faces that had ignored me for 3 years. I saw the people who had walked past me while I mopped their floors. They saw me now. They really saw me. I felt a tear run down my cheek. I did not wipe it away. I let it fall. It was the last tear I would shed for the past. 6 months later, the sign on the glass door of the 42nd floor was changed. It no longer said just Thorpe Auction House. It said Thorpe and Vance, Fine Art and Authentication. I sat in my new office. It was the office that used to belong to Dr. Eris. The walls were lined with books. The window looked out over the city. The sun was setting and turning the buildings into pillars of gold. I was wearing a suit of cream silk. I had a meeting in 10 minutes with the director of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. He wanted me to review their entire Renaissance collection. There was a knock on the door. It was Julian. He was holding 2 cups of coffee. He walked in and set one down on my desk. He looked happy. The dark circles under his eyes were gone. The company was thriving. We had rebuilt the reputation of the house on a foundation of absolute brutal honesty. We were known as the place where nothing fake could survive. "Are you ready for the meeting?" he asked. "I am always ready," I said. I took a sip of the coffee. It was hot and strong. It did not taste like the instant coffee I used to drink in my basement apartment. "I was thinking," Julian said. He sat down in the leather chair opposite me. "We should hire a new cleaner for the executive suite. The night shift position is open." I laughed. It was a deep and throaty laugh. "Make sure you check her references," I said. "And make sure you treat her with respect. You never know who she might really be." "I learned that lesson," Julian said. "I learned it the hard way." He stood up and walked to the door. He paused and looked back at me. "Thank you, Elizabeth," he said, "for everything." "Get out of here, Julian," I said, smiling. "We have work to do." He left the office. I turned my chair to look out the window. I watched the lights of the city coming on one by one. I thought about Gavin sitting in his cell. I thought about the fake Da Vinci which we had destroyed. I thought about the long road that had led me back here. I picked up my magnifying glass. I held it up to the city. I looked at the world through the lens. It was messy, it was chaotic, but it was real. And that was enough for me.